So when we were leaving Vietnam, everyone in the plane was somber. You hear people describe the 10,000 yard stare or whatever. Everyone just staring ahead. And this whole plane was filled with 101st Airborne personnel. But at some point, the pilot announced, "Gentlemen, we're now over international waters." And the cheer went up. And I turned around, and all I saw were sparkles. The whole plane was filled with teeth.
We got on board, and once the engines revved up, and then the plane started taxiing down, everything got silent. You could hear a pin drop in the plane. There was no talking, no nothing, until that plane started to take off and the wheels came into the belly of the plane. Man, there was a cheer like we just scored a touchdown. I mean, everybody was excited.
Everybody's silent. And then all hell breaks loose because you're up above any opportunity for people to hit the plane, you know.
The loudest noise I've ever experienced in my life was not that ammo dump going off in Chu Lai in the beginning of the Tet Offensive. It was when those wheels hit the ground on American soil. Okay. Everybody in that jet was screaming and yelling. They were so happy to be home.
Everybody was cheering, you know. It was just great we're home. You know, God bless the USA. I remember being on a plane and seeing this fellow come back from in-country. And he was so, his nerves were so on edge. He was so delicate. And I knew when he got off that that plane, he was going to walk into a lot of negative feelings, you know. And this guy was very fragile. I didn't know what I was coming home to. And it was, you know, I had to get reacquainted in lots of different ways.
It was the worst incident of my life when I came back to my own country after Vietnam.
My dad was an officer in World War II, and I heard his stories. And, you know, when Johnny comes marching home again, wasn't there.
They had just issued us brand new khaki uniforms, and I felt very proud because I was coming home from Vietnam in my khaki uniform. I'd made corporal, and that's the pictures I have of my daddy coming home from World War II. He had his khaki uniform on. He was a corporal. He had fought for freedom. I'd fought, you know, I was just really proud in my heart. And when he told us, well, you can't fly home in your uniform, well, why not? The word spread quickly that there were protesters outside the gate.
They warned us about it when we were leaving the country. And I suspect they didn't want you worrying about it the whole year, you know, so they didn't really emphasize it very much over there.
They didn't want us at the terminal because of all the anti-war protesters, and they didn't want us to get exposed to that.
They flew us in at 2 in the morning because there was protesting going on.
He said, when you go to the airport in San Francisco, there will be people there that will meet you and do things to you that you haven't even dreamed about yet.
They would yell at you and call you names, and I mean, some of the names, I was so naive, I didn't even know what they were saying to me. And my girlfriend said, no, we're not walking with you because people are gonna yell and call you names, so you better get some civilian clothes.
You're probably gonna wind up being assaulted by protesters. You might even get spit on. And I thought, this is just wrong.
A lot of brothers said, hey man, you know, don't be wearing your uniform, don't let people know, and you know, so I didn't.
In a split second, I remember thinking, why am I running away from my uniform? Why am I running away from a badge of honor? It made me feel very, very cheap doing this, even though I didn't want to create a problem for my family.
So the recommendation to me was to take off your uniform when you get home. And that's exactly what I did.
It's kind of ironic. You don't fear the enemy you might confront on the battlefield, but you fear the American public that's going to disown you for having served at the beck and call of the commander-in-chief.
I got off the airplane and went right into the men's room, took my uniform off, and wore my civilian clothes. I was anticipating that if I continued to wear my uniform, I was a senior officer, I would imagine that it was going to be even worse for me.
We were so proud of our uniform, of what we were doing. We were all volunteers. We worked extra hours. We did everything that we thought we were supposed to represent our country well.
Now you're ashamed of us, you know? We can't be proud of who we are. You know, I know this may sound sick, you know, but I enjoyed wearing my navy blues.
I wore dress blues. I figured I'd serve my time. I wasn't backing down then. They didn't carry weapons. There wasn't much they could do to me.
The way you were treated, there was no respect. You could just sense the hostility to people around you.
My neighbor's son, who was about 12 years old, walked up to me on the bridge and said, "Oh, Mr. Bruton, you're home. How many children did you kill?" Here's this 12-year-old kid, but it wasn't him, it was his parents, and the whole mindset of how could that be the first thing that anyone could say to anybody?
A friend of mine had on what we call military chuckle boots, and these what they called the Derby Rangers. That was an offshoot of the Black Panthers. They came up and said, "You in the military or something?" And the guy said, and the guy I was with said, "You see these daggone chuckle boots, don't you?" And they started chasing us because they felt that anyone that participated in the military was not for the black cause.
We were spat on. We were called baby killers, but I took no bitterness out of that. It was a country confused.
I was in groups when that happened, and some very bright, intelligent people called us that.
There was no heroes in Vietnam. The stigma was put on us as baby killers. I don't care what you did, as long as you were a Vietnam vet.
The protesters had bags of human excrement and were throwing that at us.
I was hit on my uniform, the uniform of the United States of America. I was hit in the chest with a bag of human you-know-what that ran down my uniform. That was my greetings returning to my country after fighting a war that my country sent me to do.
I was lucky in a way. Nobody asked me about my service that much, and nobody disparaged me for it. But certainly nobody was standing there saying thank you or great job and things of that nature.
Best reaction I got was indifference. That's all I can say. Nobody ever said thank you.
I just couldn't see how they could even think along those lines. If they'd have blamed the officials, the seniors, but they didn't. They picked on the young enlisted, those people who was carrying the guns, and in our case, a lot of the wounded.
It was very traumatic, and it has a lot to do with PTSD in a lot of fellows, because the way they were treated when they came back made a lasting impression on them.
The other sort of interesting thing looking back is, as a veteran, I felt invisible.
Every movie I had ever seen growing up showed soldiers being praised, ticker tape parades, you know, people running up and shaking their hands, you know, the iconic, you know, image of the sailor coming back and kissing the nurse. And I'm being told, take off your uniform. Don't let anybody know that you've just come back from Vietnam. Don't even acknowledge that you've been, you know, in the military. Just go home and report back in 30 days. And that made, what was this for? Why the hell did I put my life at risk for a year? And this is the homecoming that I get.
The previous generations of our family were welcomed home in a way that Vietnam veterans did not experience.
I'm driving back to my house in my old car, just home from Vietnam, and everyone's asleep. And so it's about 1 o'clock in the morning now, and so I just went into my old room. And I just laid there thinking I should just get up, get back on the plane, and go back.
What's amazing was that after all these years, what they rubbed on us washed off a long time ago, but the names that they called us still hurts our hearts.
There was a lot of sentiment that we shouldn't be going, we shouldn't be in Vietnam. And that wasn't our choice. Our choice was, are you going to support your country or not? Admiral Stephen Decatur once said, and I'm paraphrasing, my country may she always be right, but my country, my country, right or wrong. I carried that slogan with me for a long time. Well, 50 years. When I talk about this, I get very nervous when I look back on my own history. Some of you may have that same feeling. But, you know, the 60s were a very destructive time in the country's history. And I was a part of that. In that generation, we were really askew and we were running away. A lot of it is just plain cowardice, you know.
What our country went through in the 60s divided the country in a profound way, which we have lived with for decades. And to a great extent, we're still fighting that division that occurred over the Vietnam War.
Vietnam was a very confusing thing, and certainly the country was in a confusion, in a battle over it. But also there were other forces that were at work in the 60s that were undermining our principles.
Martin Luther King was killed a month prior, and Robert Kennedy was killed a few days after I got back. So there are all kinds of riots, what are called race riots and political riots.
Can you imagine now, you're fighting for your country, but still you had racism within your country?
And I was caught up in it only in the sense that toward the end of the 60s, I had gone to school, I had also gone to my reserve meetings and all of that, but I was focused on myself. I was surprised that there was that much vitriol in the attitude of the American people.
They were a victim of Vietnam as much as those of us that went and came back. You know, as they said, we were suckers for going, losers for coming back. And I think that image stuck even in their minds.
I think the world got tweaked, is the best I can put it. They had messed up by not supporting the young veterans coming back.
And they come back with injuries, and then injuries that you can't see, which are even the worst injuries, the mental injuries. And they're treated in such a fashion. It's a great crime. A great crime was committed.
Having the right to protest is one of the things that our country stands for.
There is room for discussion, for protests, for the other side. And I'm thankful every day that we do. I love it when someone stands up and says, wait a minute, I'm not for that.
They almost always had some signs. They always had the bullhorns. They had worked hard at developing ways to goad people.
What they were protesting had a lot of validity at the time. The number of deaths we were taking, 50, 100 a day, and the body bags pouring back. Most of those kids should never have been killed over there.
My sister apologized to me about 5 years ago. She says, you know, I protested the war. I was, you know, we were out with signs, and I said, oh, good, you know. She says, I want to apologize. I said, why are you apologizing to me? I was against it too.
Well, obviously everybody has the right for freedom of speech and have to protest whatever they choose to. But what was unfortunate at the time is they took a lot of their frustrations out on the GIs coming home.
I'm going back in 2 more weeks.
I'm not afraid to burst my
That's good. I just got back last year.
We fight so you can stand here and yell. You've got your right to do this now. You're supposed to. You know what all the internal conflict is?
They took it out on the service member who was only doing their duty. You know, you only do, you know, the duty you're called to do.
As soldiers and as veterans, we're also citizens.
Some of the reasons that they protested were self-serving. And some of the reasons that they protested were not philosophical. They were, I just don't want to go. You guys go and take care of me. And I have little respect for people who sit in the boat and won't row.
The ones that found all kinds of creative ways to avoid getting drafted are now going to spit on me, are going to tell me I can't wear this uniform. I'm not all that excited about it in the first place, but just the idea that now you're going to make me feel bad about what I did that I didn't ask for.
The military was a convenient target. You know, the thought that, well, I voted for this guy and got him in office didn't even register. But I think young people today are more savvy and recognize the fact that, you know, if they vote the politician in and he makes the decision to go to war, we're just a tool that's being used to conduct that policy. And you know, why blame the tool?
I can't defend everything they did, but I can see why they took the positions they took. We had people in Congress taking those positions.
Now, my brother, who has since passed away, he protested the war. I did not talk or deal with my brother for years and years and years because of that.
My dad is a World War II combat veteran. He looked at me and said, you know what? That wasn't a war. He said, you don't know what war is. And I was ready to fight my father. My sister jumped in between us. It was almost 10 years that my father and I did not talk to each other.
I could not understand, you know, the protesting. I could not understand the rioting that was going on about Vietnam. It made no sense to me one way or the other. I just felt that it was my time as a young American male to do my military service.
I didn't want to be at that war. I thought the war was stupid as all get out, but I did what I was supposed to do. But I was equally as mad at people getting mad at me for having done what I was supposed to do when it wasn't my decision to do it. So, you know, I'm torn between both. And that's why I said, you know what, the best thing to do is take this whole thing and just shove it into a hole and say, screw it.
I was just weary of defending the country. And so I quit talking about it.
Our country let him down. Our government let him down. Our people in the streets let him down. And it makes a difference.
My name is Frederick Luskin, and I work both as director of the Stanford Forgiveness Projects and I'm the department chair here of clinical psychology. I had been a pretty avid Vietnam War protester and had literally considered that one of the black marks of American history. I had very liberal parents who completely did not support the war and thought it was a travesty. I so identified myself as somebody who not only disliked the Vietnam War, but thought it was a disgrace. So it wasn't just in the public pronouncements, it was part of my self-image. When it becomes like integrated into your personality structure, you don't even recognize that you have it, first of all, and you can say and do things that are very cruel because of that. Do I believe that I saw it at that time clearly? Absolutely. But the hostility and hatred, I'm not so happy with. As part of getting a PhD in psychology, you have to do a year's internship, full-time clinical practice. And the internship that accepted me was a veterans hospital on Long Island in Northport. I literally had no idea what I was walking into. I mean, I had no idea. And I show up there and I meet all these veterans. I mean, I had never met and talk to in depth that many veterans ever. And they had experiences that were still there. I mean, this was 1998 that I did this internship, or 97. And so it was, what, 25 years after the war ended? I heard stories, like uncensored stories, that both established the factual, on-the-ground nature of everything I believed about that war. But it gave it a personal face. But it showed me something that I had never understood, which was both the patriotism of these guys who had done this, but their kind of heroic nature. And I remember one guy telling me that he was the point person in his platoon in Vietnam, and he was out there like by himself in the front for like 6 months. And I'm thinking I would have lasted about 45 seconds, and I would have running from my mother, and you know, he's out there doing this, but he had that capacity, like I could, and I started to understand that my skills, while valuable, were just one set of skills. The thing that I had never understood in an anti-war stance was the incredible value of men, at that time it was mostly men, who are willing to sacrifice their own well-being to protect those of other people. Like, if you don't have those people, then all the therapists in the world have no value. And so what I started to understand was the need for all kinds. All of my experience changed because I got to listen to veterans and saw them as human beings just like me.
My name is Don Andre, and I currently live in Rockford, Illinois, and teach school there at a private Christian school. I took part in a few marches. I listened to people talk and give speeches about the war. I wanted an end to the killing. I wanted an end to the dying on both sides. We were having the interim week at the private school. They had invited several guest speakers. There were some who were speaking on the civil rights movement and all of the sit-ins and that kind of thing. And then they wanted to also invite someone who could speak about the Vietnam War experience.
It was at I think it was a grammar school, and in big school, talking to an auditorium full of children. Well, one of the children asked, well, how were you treated when you came home from Vietnam? My grandfather has said that he was treated very poorly.
Here was a real human being sitting in front of me, standing in front of me, and telling me about that experience. And now it became real. There was flesh and blood to it. It wasn't an article in a newspaper. It wasn't an article in a magazine. It wasn't even a news video clip. It was real. It was a man. A man who had just talked to a whole room full of children. And that made it real to me. That crystallized it. That tied everything together for the first time.
One of the teachers came forward, and I seen him taking something from around his neck and holding it like this. And I could see his eyes were, I won't say he was crying, but his eyes were misty. And he come walking up to me and he said, Sergeant Davis, I was wrong. I was misinformed. I would like to give you my peace symbol that I have worn ever since Vietnam. And he opened up his hand.
There's this kind of a thing that psychologists talk about all the time. They talk about the 10-second opportunity. That when something strikes you as, here's something that should be done, you have 10 seconds in which to respond. If the 10 seconds pass by and you don't do it, you're never going to do it. That moment hit me, and I said, I have to do this. That I've got to reach out to him for all of us who are opposed to the war. Somebody's got to do it. And I'm here. I have this peace sign on my neck. That's at least, it's only a gesture, but at least it says, here, we're not all like that.
And I have carried that peace symbol with me. It's been 15 years, or close to 15 years, but I remember the look in his eye, and that helps.
I knew that there was something wrong with me from halfway through the time I was in the infantry. I just started getting numb. I could always keep up and do my job, but I just became more wooden. They didn't invent PTSD as a diagnosis for another 10 years. This was November 1970 when I came home. So I had to struggle along for another 5, 6, 7 years, just doing the best I could. You get to thinking, well, I can't speak about this. Nobody wants to hear it. And you begin to wonder if it was really true, you know, and you park it back in, you know, some little place in the back of your mind. And I think that happening to myself, but to a lot of my fellow veterans, led to deeper symptoms of PTSD than would have happened otherwise.
When I think of the trauma that they've been through from what they've seen and experienced, and this happens in all wars, and it happened way back, and they didn't have a name, post-traumatic stress in the Second World War, but those guys came back with the same conditions. And then I realized what the added trauma, maybe even worse than the original, that they came back to a coldness, to a lack of appreciation for the sacrifice they made. I mean, my God.
We've had Vietnam veterans come up to this helicopter and touch it and cry like a baby, and hug us. It's all part of the start of the healing process for PTSD.
They set up a Vietnam Veterans Memorial in Long Island, and I was at that event. And all of a sudden, 4 helicopters, whirlybirds, come up over the hill, sent a chill through my body. I mean, the reaction, and I turned white, and the guy next to me said to me, "What's the matter, Joe?" I said, "Oh, man, that sound." I mean, he says, "You got PTSD."
I knew something was wrong. Everybody else knew something was wrong. I got married just before I got out of the service, and obviously my wife knew that I needed help, but at that time it wasn't something I could admit to.
We didn't really think about it, and then along comes your 50s, 60s, and the stresses of life mount, the challenges in life mount up, and post-traumatic stress sets in, and then you have to deal with it.
I would say I suffer from post-traumatic stress, but not disorder, because of not having the courage in my own mind to live up to my own moral code.
In Vietnam, as an artillery fire direction specialist, I had helped kill a lot of people. By 1994, it had become clear to me that what I was really struggling with was, you know, a profound sense of guilt. I've written a lot about what are now called moral injury, which are the kinds of psychological harm that comes when a soldier violates his own moral code. And the VA now recognizes that as a particular kind of PTSD called moral injury.
As I got an education, got a job, got a house, etc., things are getting smoother. Now I'm thinking more, and these thoughts are coming up now. I'm in the woods, and now I think about the triple canopy jungle. Where'd this come from? All of a sudden. Why am I thinking about this? Why am I thinking about an ambush now? You know, all of a sudden, 20 years later, 30 years later, but now it starts coming up.
I didn't get angry until the hostages from Iran got their ticker tape parade. I cried.
I would say anyone who probably faced combat in Vietnam has a degree of PTSD. I do.
There's 5 of us that are very close still that went to Vietnam. They were stationed in other places, but we were there the same year, but different places. And they definitely have PTSD and I have it.
These guys came back, and they weren't the same, and the families paid a very dear price for that.
My family has seen me sitting and just busting out crying because a trigger, something I seen. No matter what your job was, you do have post-traumatic stress. Now, some are a little deeper than others, but we all have it. When we can bring it out and open it up and let people look in our hearts and then share what's truly in your heart with your brothers and sisters, it not only helps you, but it helps them.
This pain they've been through makes them wise. So we should listen to them. And sometimes, the wise ones in the room will be screaming and shouting. In pain, even. But you better listen. Because they will tell us, if we listen to them, where we went wrong. And what we have to do to prevent that from happening ever again.
My name is Steve Alpert. We're in Quogue, New York. I'm a fine art painter. Years ago, I started landscapes, pretty much only landscapes. And then in 2003, I started making military paintings. I didn't really know why at the time, but just the fact that I was compelled to do so. And over the years, it became a calling. So I had a high lottery number. I was not called, and by the time I got out of college in 1973, Vietnam was seriously winding down. I'd always wanted to be in the military. It's my greatest regret in my life that I didn't serve my country in uniform. I'm so deeply sorry that I did not. So, in a way, this is a way that through my paintings, I can participate and at least do something. Years ago, I was on a Washington Metro doing a video job. There was a man sitting right across from me with a Vietnam veteran ball cap. I don't know how many years ago this was. Way before the Iraq. It was like in the late 90s. So the fact that he was wearing one on Veterans Day, I thought, maybe he would like to be thanked. And I went through this debate in myself. Do I thank him? Do I not thank him? I don't know. He seems unapproachable. He didn't look like a happy fellow. And so I said, I can't miss this up. I have to take it. Because if I don't do it, I'm going to get off the train. I'm going to regret not taking the chance. I'm going to take the chance. I got up and, I broke that public-private line of silence in public transportation. And I stuck my hand out. I said, thank you so much for your service, sir. And he looked up at me, and my hand was hanging out in the air. He was not taking it. He didn't want to take my hand. It was very awkward, and there were a couple of people who were watching this thing play out, and it was very uncomfortable. And I felt like a dork, and yet I felt like I had to do it. But did I have to do it for me, or did I have to do it for him? I don't really know. Probably a little bit of both. So he begrudgingly shook my hand. I wouldn't even say he clasped he just sort of offered his hand. And made contact, and then he averted his eyes. He never said anything. And the next stop, he got off, not knowing whether that was to stop or was it so uncomfortable for him. I feel that the damage that has been done to our returning veterans in Vietnam is irreparable. I don't feel that we can just say, hey, we're really sorry now that we didn't honor you when you came home, and we're really sorry that we ignored you, but will you accept our apology? I don't think that's a reasonable question to ask. I think the damage is so deep and so raw still, and I don't think there's any road back.
When somebody refuses, thank you for your service, I think that when they came home 50 years ago and experienced things similar to me, they're not ready to put their emotions out on trial again. When my two sons came home, my two oldest sons, they had been to Iraq. And the whole tenor of the country had changed. And they brought me home a hat, Iraq, Vietnam. And I wore that around, hoping not to get spat on. As I remember, it was a grocery store, and it was a man came out behind the meat counter, and he came out with such aggression that it startled me. I went defensive for a moment. He reached his hand out, and so I reached my hand out and shook him, and he said, "Thank you for your service." And that was when the miraculousness of the metamorphosis changed, and I began to be proud that I had served in Vietnam, not apprehensive. And it wasn't me that changed, it was the American public.
I took Vietnam experience and most of my military experience, and I put it in this compartment and forgot about it, just as if it just never happened. My family, of course, knew, but we never talked about it. I didn't talk about it in Vietnam with anybody for a long, long time. I just forgot about it. Just screw it. And went on with my life.
For those guys who are still suffering, we must do everything we can for them.
My name is Robert Bray. I'm licensed as a clinical social worker in the state of California, and I've been in private practice for 30 years. I also have a PhD in psychology with an emphasis in marriage and family therapy. I've never seen a case when I've sat down with somebody with post-traumatic stress that isn't better for having done the work. And that work is getting honest about what's going on. That work is finding a place that you feel safe so you can have an experience of processing it in a way that'll help you deal with it better. That makes you better.
When I was a child, somehow or another, I got a hold of the ironing cord. Hot iron landed on my arm, burned me severely. That scar is healed. It's gone. I don't think about it. It's better. But there's no such a thing as healing from the standpoint of most people think about healing as you're okay now. That's half the reason why I think so many veterans are having issues, because people think, well, that war was so long ago, you should be okay now. You should be healed. That's a load of crap.
There's certain language that's a little more difficult than other. You know, in therapy or in certain techniques or in certain, we might say surrender to it, surrender to the feeling. You don't use that language around military because it evokes a response that's not good. Same thing with healing, if you talk about that.
And I don't like to use the term healing because they never really heal. They get better, they improve, but they still, still have this issue, whether it's PTSD or whatever it might be, that remains.
I'm healed. I consider myself healed. Even though I have a PTSD designation in my VA file, it's not something that, as I have said, interferes with my life. I accepted what happened to me personally, losing my leg. I can accept losing good friends and what happened in Vietnam, and I can move on, and it doesn't interfere. But I think about it every day.
I'm concerned about how people will interpret the term. Because I don't think that soldier's ever going to get healed in the sense that I think you're talking about.
It's all about healing. So all of those things are healing. It just, those experiences lead you to try and figure out how to get healed.
The definition of the word healing is a little tricky. So, I'm not cured. I don't think I'm going to be. But I can be more equal, more level.
It's a matter of learning how to cope with, deal with, get on with your life, still have a successful life, still be able to accomplish things, still be okay. but it's not like you're never going to stop remembering and thinking. And something, it's not like there's not going to someday along the way be a trigger that takes you back to something that you just as soon forget.
We have ways now to make those things memories, not to be flashbacks, not to be triggers, but to be something that you can pull up when you choose to, when you want to share your story, and you can put away when you're done sharing your story.
I think it's more you have to cope with it. Yeah, I don't think there's ever going to be a healing. It's always going to be there for the rest of my life.
I don't think there is a cure. You're not supposed to forget. You're supposed to remember, I'm better, but I'm not well yet.
To have a traumatic event happen to us, we do all of this stuff in the lower half of the brain and our justification of it. If you have a traffic accident, yeah, it could be horrible, could be terrible, and for 3 days you might not sleep, and you may have these pictures flashing in your head. But at 30 days, if your own internal healing systems are working and you have the support to do it, you won't be having those flashes. You will be sleeping at night. In a year, it will be a memory that you've incorporated into your life.
Part of the healing process is sharing the pain and sharing the memories with other veterans.
I think that's key to not totally healing someone, but to bringing them to a point in their life that renders them more comfortable with, everyday life.
I've carried that baggage for years. Ghost in the closet. And it's like I said, it's practically destroyed me, destroyed my marriage. And you finally have to decide, enough's enough. Myself, I found that going into a group of other veterans that had like experiences was a healing process.
For 14 years, I never said a word about Vietnam, and I never talked about the things that I had done or what had happened to me. It was something that part of my life, I just wanted to forget. And so I packed up all of my uniforms, my decorations and medals, threw them in a footlocker, locked it up, and took it and stuck it in the attic of the garage.
But there's a price to pushing the feelings away. The price to pushing the feelings away means you don't have access to not only those feelings, but a lot of other feelings. And it affects your relationships, it affects your ability to be part of a community, to be part of life.
When you come home, the world is pacified. You don't need to carry a weapon anymore to survive. But you have a latent energy inside you that must be directed somewhere, somehow, or else you're going to suffer PTSD. My direction went toward horses, and I was able to transfer those energies to a four-legged creature that responded to me, and I feel fulfilled.
So there are three principal ways that I went about working on healing. I started writing poems. I tried to write about the times that I'd gotten a little more numb that I could remember. 2 was a whole lot of therapy, finding out what your PTSD is. If you have it, you can sort it out. Maybe it's something else. And the third thing was I was touched by Buddha study. So that's helpful as well. I'm not cured. I don't think I'm going to be. But I can be more equal, more level.
I'm a very religious person, and that got me through a lot of this, and that if I can't get help locally, I had help from upstairs.
What veterans have to do, especially from the Vietnam era, is embrace the good things in their life. If you have family, embrace that. If you have a passion for whether it be a business or a sport or whatever it is you're doing, embrace that. Embrace anything that's positive in your life.
Rather than being reactive, I try to act instead of react. That's helped a lot. I do pottery, and that's kind of a meditation thing, and running was kind of a meditation thing where I was able to kind of space out and let the rest of the world go by and that kind of stuff.
For many vets, and I would think probably the majority of vets, whether they're healing or not healing, have turned their experience into a constructive process.
I firmly believe that writing about those experiences, and especially sharing them with people who have gone through similar experiences, can be healing.
I'm involved in veterans groups here in Sonoma County. I'm involved with the ones who act on the ground, doing things that you can see. I get phone calls, or someone says, we have a homeless vet here, let's get him in, let's do something. I don't want them to be left like that Vietnam vet I saw 30 years ago. I gained some solace from that. I actually feel good about helping. I want to help. I want to do as best I can.
In 2002, I went back to Vietnam, and it took all the courage I had to go, and as closer I got, I was just shaking. Finally, I realized that no one has a problem here with me. You know, I'm the problem, and you got to get together. You know, that was just so helpful.
We have this group, about 95 former Marines, and they go from World War II vets to all the way up to Iraq, Afghanistan. We stand with each other, we talk with each other, and we support each other. That's an important aspect.
One day, I can't say where it came from or something, I just woke up in the morning and I felt this little glimmer of hope that, you know, that I could work that out, that it was possible. I didn't know how, still, they didn't tell me how, but I mean, that's really, you know, hope is really key to healing.
I don't have a desire to go to Washington to see the wall, because I think that wall triggers things. And so the problem is I don't know what all it might trigger, but if it triggers something, yeah, I'm likely to not have a good day.
When you go to the wall in Washington, all you see is names. I find that very sad.
I cannot walk in front of that wall. I go to pieces. I just can't do it.
I reached for the wall, and I couldn't touch it. I couldn't touch it. I couldn't bring myself to touch the wall.
I think the sheer numbers overwhelmed me at first, but then as days went by, then I'd start looking to see if I could find names of corpsmen that I'd had serving and that I had known had been killed in action.
I guess what I would do is get the names of my father-in-law's brother. I think it was two of them, actually. And I'd go looking for that name.
I visited some names and became very introspective for a while. My family was there to support me at the time, which made me feel good. They didn't say anything, which was more than I could ask for. They just knew.
Many, many years ago, back in the 1980s, was the first time I visited it. And it was difficult. I cried.
The names of 14 good friends are on that wall. And I went along and found their names, and it's sad. They're all young guys.
You know, again, I've learned how to deal with not having good days. But I would go there fully prepared for this might not be a good day.
The people I know, for some strange reason, are at the bottom of the list on the wall. I have to get on my knees to touch them. And I hope they're never forgotten.
Yeah, I'm kind of all over the place right now. Combination of curious, a little excited, and a bit apprehensive. For me, the issue is they drew the short straw. You know, I got back. They didn't get back. And that has just been triggering all kinds of thoughts, issues. But I'm kind of feeling honored to come and acknowledge them. And I don't know, just something about that has all of a sudden become kind of important to me.
The wall took quantum leaps forward in making military people aware that the country was trying to recognize us for the contribution that we made through Vietnam.
There's a necessary internal psychological need to touch that wall and touch that name. And if you don't, you leave the emptiness. And when you do, it fills.
There's such a somber atmosphere about that wall. You just become sort of consumed by the reality of where you are. You know, it's just kind of like, okay, I'm a little more at ease, a little more at peace with it.
Sam. Many years ago, you gave me this, and I've showed it to 10,000 people and told the story. Thank you for walking up to me that day at the school. That has been in my heart all these years. Thank you for giving my heart peace.
You told us about how when the vets came off the planes, they were often greeted at the airport with jeering mobs and sometimes even
and worse,
spat upon.
Yes, sir.
I decided that there had to be some gesture of reconciliation.
It has been a symbol of peace around my neck and in my heart all of these years. And today, I want to give it back to you, brother. And thank you for sharing the peace that's in your heart with my old beat up heart. And it's helped heal it. Thank you, brother.
Thank you.
Cool.
Times are changing. Times have changed, and I've recognized that. I had a helicopter at the state capitol in Raleigh, North Carolina for a 4th of July event. And I'm standing by the gunship in my flight suit, and I had this family walk up to me. He said, "Were you in Vietnam?" I said, "Yes." He said, "I was a protester." And I'm thinking, here it comes, and I'm going to knock this guy right on his ass. He said, "My father was a protester. My mother was a protester. My whole family protested against you, and I'm just waiting for it to happen, you know." And he says, "I am so ashamed of myself." He said, "I have carried the guilt of being a protester against my armed forces all these years." And he said, and he's beginning to cry, and he said, "Could you find it in your heart to forgive me?"
I forgive the protesters. I forgive all the people. When someone says, "Thank you for your service," or "Welcome home," it's a joy. It's a joy. We didn't hear that for so many years. So now to finally get it, embrace that feeling that someone's finally saying something nice to you. Let go of the old stuff. So I don't blame those vets that maybe resent it a little bit. There's not a lot of them. I think there's only a few. So By and large, I would say 90% of all the vets love to hear that. It's a good feeling.
There was an article that came out in the daily newspaper, showed a Vietnam vet and jungle fatigues, cami glasses, you know, that kind of stuff. And they were talking about Vietnam veterans, suicide and drug craze, psychopathic, walking time bomb. And I'm like, that's not me. I work. I go to work every day, you know. And so I went down to this, was then called the Vietnam Vet Centers. And I had the newspaper and I threw it at his desk and I said, this ain't me. I said, you're portraying all Vietnam vets like this. And he looked at me and said, well, if you feel that way, why don't you do something about it? And I thought, yeah, I think I will. So in 1982, we put together the first Welcome Home parade or conference in the country. And I had a bunch of guys come up to me saying, hey, thank you for this. Thanks for welcoming us home. We never had that. And I thought, what did I just do? We just opened up a can of worms here.
I'm Jim Ware. I am the founder and organizer of the Salute to American Veterans Rally. The rally is an effort by civilians to honor veterans, to recognize their service, to thank them for their sacrifices on our behalf, and mostly to welcome home vets that might have never really gotten one. Our older veterans, our World War II and Korean veterans, were treated pretty good, you know, when they came back. A lot of them got parades, and certainly they were hailed as heroes, especially the World War II guys. Vietnam vets, not so much.
On behalf of the city of Cripple Creek and the surrounding communities, I would like to extend a warm welcome to you as we celebrate the 23rd annual Salute to American Veterans Rally.
For 25, 30 years, a lot of these guys lived in hiding. We felt like we needed to do our little part to say, hey, you know, we get it. We know what you went through, or at least we can try to imagine what you went through, and God, are we sorry, and thank you. So the least that we could do is pay a little tribute, you know, have a little thank you.
Today, the country welcomes them with open arms. Even though we never had our own parade, we wanted to make sure that our sons and daughters got welcome home, and that the country looked at veterans differently.
The might of America is not its weaponry, it's its people. And now is the time to cohese and come together.
So one day I got a call from the Kennedy Center. They were going to do a tribute, the Kennedy tribute. They were going to recognize Garth Brooks and Billy Joel. So I called a couple of Vietnam vets that I knew, and they called a couple more, and before you know it, I had 50 Vietnam vets showing up on a Saturday for a taping on a Sunday. And the night of the show, where we had to come out and sing, we all got together, and we all said, look, guys, we're all here not for us. We're here for all those Vietnam vets that can't be here. We're here for those that died. So let's make everybody proud. We walked out on stage, all 50 Vietnam vets, when Garth Brooks started the song to Billy Joel, Goodbye Saigon. When we walked on stage, the whole audience stood and started applauding, and they were crying. Not because Garth Brooks was singing the song, they were applauding and crying and cheering because 50 Vietnam vets walked on stage with the song playing in the background. And I was stunned by that because this was the first time any of us had heard that, like that. And it wasn't for me, it was for all the other Vietnam vets. The president stood, and Miss Obama stood, and all the other dignitaries stood, and they were applauding, and they were crying. And it just happened that the camera had caught me saluting the president, and the president saluted me back. And my daughter called me, and she said, Dad, I saw that on TV. She said, you know what? I think that's a curtain call. It's time for you to come home. And I thought about that. I remember sitting in my office there. My office overlooks the White House, great view. And I thought about that, and I thought, you know what? I've been working all this time to bring my vets home. And now it's time for me to come home. And so I made a decision. I called my wife. I says, I think I'm done. It's time for me to come home. So I tendered my resignation at the VA, and I came home. And, excuse me. So my wife and kids were at the airport. So that was my coming home.
Now they go to the airport, they welcome them. Everybody's now said thank you for your service. And I think it's great.
There's an honest effort to demonstrate appreciation for those who made the sacrifice.
There's been a turn in the appreciation of the military. Right now, most of the people in this country appreciate the military.
For an old man like me, hey, thank you. I appreciate it. I'm flattered by it.
I'm much happier now the way they treat people. And I'm proud to wear my military cap, Marine Corps, and people all the time say thank you for your service. It feels good.
Those who stayed in support had an obligation just as much as those who served. And when they realized that and fulfilled that obligation, it was a tremendous healing experience.
I have a license plate that says, Vietnam vet, nurse. It's gotten out of one speeding ticket because the cop saw that. I went, I'm a nurse.
All of a sudden, I'm proud of being a Vietnam veteran and not ashamed.
Even back in the 70s and early 80s, I would maybe wear a shirt or something that said Vietnam veteran. Rarely would anybody come up and say, thank you for your service. But it happens almost daily.
I was very pleased to see that. I'm very happy to say, finally, you all got it.
Never gets old. They're always welcome.
Appreciation developed for veterans. It's a long time coming, but it's here. And thank God it is.
Patriotism, pride, honor, respect, courage, all those things, that's what being an American is about.
Vietnam vets put a effort in to send the message out there that never again will one group of veterans turn their back on another.
Every returning veteran, since I come home, I've tried very hard to make sure that they got the proper treatment, that they got the thank you. And I think it's working.
These are the sons and daughters of Vietnam vets coming home today. And so today the country welcomes them with open arms.
It has greatly to do with the efforts of the Vietnam veterans. Maybe we've turned the corner and learned that lesson, and no other group of military will ever be treated like that ever again in our history, thank God.
Whether we went to the war or whether we stayed home and avoided the war, we're all brothers and sisters, and we all went through a really unnecessary experience. America at this 50th anniversary of Vietnam is to recognize that we as a country need to heal by coming together.
There's this funny statement that people may say, I may not be what I should be. I may not be what I'm going to be, but at least I ain't what I was.